Kate and her husband John arrive at the hospital for her childbirth. Kate gets wheeled away, while John stays behind to complete the admission process. However, things take a sinister turn when Kate begins to bleed. Before long, she finds herself in the operating room, surrounded by medical personnel. The situation starts to get surreal as the nurse, smiling, breaks the devastating news that her baby had not survived. To add to the strangeness, John appears, nonchalantly filming, as though nothing had gone wrong. Kate, screaming, suddenly wakes up in her own bed. She gets up and goes to the bathroom, where she examines a scar on her belly. The following day, she attends a therapy session with Dr. Browning, who explains that such nightmares are a common reaction to the trauma of stillbirth. But Kate thinks the dream is related to the adoption she and John had planned, also confiding that she contemplated buying alcohol while stressing about it. Dr. Browning notes that it is her decision to make regarding the adoption, and it's okay to contemplate, as long as she doesn't use again. Kate leaves the session with a lot to think about, and goes to pick up her daughter Max from school. While driving her home, she becomes momentarily distracted at a stoplight and almost causes an accident. A few hours later, Kate is trying to compose music at the piano until she is interrupted by a loud noise outside. Annoyed, she goes to check, realizing that it's Max throwing a basketball against the wall. After yelling her to stop, the child apologizes. John then arrives home with their son Daniel, and the three have some fun playing with the ball. That evening, Kate puts Max to bed and reads her a story about her child that passed away, and Max asks if she'll ever have a new sister. Kate then goes to bed herself, where she discusses the adoption with John, announcing that she has made up her mind. A few days later, they visit an orphanage and meet Sister Abigail, who shows them around. Kate stays on the first floor, watching the little girls play, while John goes upstairs where he finds Esther, painting and singing. Esther narrates a fascinating story about her art. Kate and Abigail soon join them, and Esther mentions nobody speaking to her before, allegedly, because of her weirdness. Despite this, they both seem to like her and talk to Abigail about the adoption. Abigail informs them that Esther was originally from Russia and that the people who brought her to the US died in a house fire. But she finishes by saying that Esther is wonderful, and Kate agrees. 3 weeks later, they pick Esther up from the orphanage and say goodbye to Abigail. In the car, Kate starts teaching Esther sign language. When they arrive home, Max is thrilled to meet Esther, who immediately introduces herself and asks how much she can hear, to which Kate replies, just enough to read people's lips. The family is greeted by Grandma Barbara and Daniel. Then, they all give Esther welcome gifts, except for Daniel, who seems jealous of her, especially when Esther hugs John to say thank you. Daniel goes outside to the treehouse with his friends and looks at dirty magazines. Meanwhile, Esther and Max play in the snow, and Barbara discusses with Kate her plans to start teaching again once Esther is settled. During the night, a storm is brewing as Kate gets ready for bed. Esther wakes up and goes to Max's room. John and Kate are in the middle of making love when the two girls knock at the door, asking to sleep in their bed, with Esther taking the spot next to John. The following day, as everyone gets ready for school, Esther descends the stairs in a peculiar dress, causing the other children to burst into laughter. Kate checks with Esther if she really wants to wear it to school, but Esther confidently replies that there's nothing wrong with being different. Moments later, when Esther's teacher greets her in class, one of the kids starts mocking her for her dress. After a few hours, Kate spots Max and Esther playing on the frozen lake and rushes out to warn them that it's not allowed. At the same time, Daniel is playing with a paintball gun and ends up shooting a pigeon. Esther and Max approach the injured bird, and Daniel becomes very distressed. Esther hands him a large rock and tells him to put the bird out of its misery, but he is hesitant to do so. Esther takes the matter into her own hands, killing the bird for Daniel. Next, Kate is putting away laundry in Esther's room, where she discovers an old Bible while searching through a drawer. Inside the Bible, Kate finds a photo of a man, but it turns out that Esther is spying on her the whole time. At school, Daniel's friends start teasing him about Esther, and in frustration, he pushes her books to the ground. When Esther goes to pick them up, the classmate that made fun of her dress snatches her Bible, and as they struggle for it, the other student reaches for Esther's collar and insults her, causing Esther to scream. Following that, Kate teaches Esther how to play the piano while trying to talk to her about what happened at school. Esther refuses to have the discussion. Kate then shows her the scrapbook she has started, and Esther asks about the baby Kate had lost. The woman explains what happened and shows Esther a pot of roses in which they had scattered the child's ashes. Later, after dinner, Kate and John assume the children are asleep and are about to have sex in the kitchen, but suddenly Esther creepily appears. The next morning, Kate, feeling uneasy about the incident, approaches Esther as she is painting, hoping to have a conversation. Esther remains unfazed and even uses the F word. Kate then discusses the matter with her husband, John, and suggests taking Esther to a therapist. However, John points out that it's an overreaction to take Esther to therapy over one word. The next day, John takes the girls to a nearby park, where one of his neighbors comes over to flirt. Esther's attention becomes divided as her school bully appears in the playground. The bully seems actually afraid of Esther, and while seeking to go down a slide, Esther appears from behind and pushes her off, causing the girl to break her leg. Max, despite witnessing the incident, at dinner, confirms Esther's lie that the girl had merely slipped, even following Esther's example in prayer. Esther also shows a better understanding of sign language than Daniel, which seems to infuriate him. Daniel then starts calling Esther names, and when their parents intervene, he runs off, cursing. As punishment, John puts a lock on his treehouse. The following day, Kate is shopping with the girls when Sister Abigail calls. Esther refuses to speak with her, but Kate continues the conversation, stepping aside to explain what has been happening, while Max reads her lips, recounting the words to Esther. That evening, Esther surprises Kate by playing the piano perfectly. When Kate asks why Esther had pretended not to know how to play, Esther claims that it was in her best interest to do so. Soon after, Kate and John have an argument about Esther, while she eavesdrops, satisfied with herself. Days later, Sister Abigail comes over, expressing concern about Esther's behavior and listing a few instances where Esther had harmed other children. Kate thinks that they should take her to see a therapist, and John reluctantly agrees. Meanwhile, Esther overhears the conversation and goes to Max, asking for help to prevent Sister Abigail from taking her away. Esther then instructs Max to find John's keys in order to unlock and hide in the treehouse. But instead, she uses them to access John's safe and get a gun. As Abigail begins to drive off in her car, Esther takes Max to a nearby bridge. As the nun approaches, Esther pushes Max onto the street, causing Abigail to swerve and crash. She survives, but Esther finishes her off with a hammer. The two girls climb into the treehouse, where Esther hides her bloody clothes and the hammer, warning Max that they would send her to jail too if she revealed to anyone what had happened, manipulatively adding that she loves her. Daniel notices them climbing down the treehouse, but so does Esther, who later that night enters Daniel's room with a blade, threatening him not to say anything. The boy gets so frightened that he wets himself. John and Kate take Esther to see Dr. Browning. After finishing her session, they leave her outside to talk to the therapist. Browning suggests that there is nothing wrong with Esther, arguing that Kate is actually the source of the family's problems, projecting her own feelings of inadequacy onto her daughter. John sides with the therapist, furthering Kate's frustration. Upon returning home, Kate receives a call from the orphanage, informing her that Sister Abigail had gone missing. Some days later, the police finds her body where Esther had left it, and they visit the family to relate the news. Meanwhile, Esther is in her room, playing with the light switch of her aquarium, showing off a sinister painting of the family and their home. Kate begins to research information about disturbed children online, sharing again her concerns with John, who dismisses her, leading to another argument. Suspicious, even about Esther's past, Kate reaches out to the Russian orphanage Sister Abigail had mentioned, discovering that there are no records of her existence prior to the adoption. Next morning, John attempts to wake Esther up for her dentist appointment, but she refuses to go. He promises to reschedule, and they spend the day painting together. At some point, Esther expresses to John her belief that Kate dislikes her, and he tries to comfort her. Meanwhile, Kate drives the other children to school and questions them about Esther. They lie, claiming that she has done nothing wrong. That evening, Esther surprises Kate with a bucket of roses, plucked from the location where Kate's daughter's ashes were scattered. The gesture enrages Kate, that grabs Esther, but John intervenes, taking the blame. Later that night, Esther sneaks into the garage, purposefully shattering her arm. She calls for John, complaining of the pain, and he discovers the broken bone. After a trip to the doctor, John tucks Esther into their bed when Kate walks in. He confronts her about the incident, but Kate denies having grabbed Esther too hard. Then, Kate buys 2 bottles of wine, pouring one down the drain while finishing the other. Next morning, she drives the kids to school, but when she exits the car to help Daniel with his torn backpack, Esther shifts the car into drive with Max still inside. Kate chases the car until it finally stops in the snow. Dr. Browning visits their home that night, and Kate swears that she put the car in park. However, John shows Kate the second wine bottle that Esther has since found, casting doubt on her story. The therapist reveals that she has reserved a spot for Kate in a rehabilitation center, but Kate denies the allegations regarding the wine and the car accident. John accuses her of being manipulative and gives her a week to attend rehab, or risk losing him and the kids. In concert, Esther threatens Max to harm her mother if she tells anyone. Max, however, confides in her brother about both Abigail and the treehouse. Daniel offers to retrieve the evidence, while Esther once more manages to overhear. During the night, Kate sneaks into Max's room, but Esther catches her, flaunting the diary she had been keeping, trying to provoke Kate, but she remains composed. The following day, Kate continues her investigation by calling the orphanage again, and by searching for Esther's Bible, which she finds hidden inside a toy. Re-examining it, she notices the words Sarn Institute. After a Google search, she comes up with a number which she calls. It turns out that the institute is actually a mental hospital and not an orphanage. At the same time, Daniel sneaks out of the house to retrieve the evidence from the treehouse, with Esther hot on his trail. Esther sets the evidence on fire and pours fuel over Daniel, trapping him inside the burning treehouse. He desperately calls for his mother, but she is preoccupied investigating Esther. With the fire spreading, Daniel climbs onto the roof, but he slips and falls. Kate, finally noticing the fire, rushes to the scene, just as Esther attempts to kill Daniel with a rock. In the nick of time, Max intervenes, and Kate also arrives, preventing Esther from causing further harm. Miraculously, Daniel survives the ordeal. The family bolts to the hospital, where the doctor informs them that Daniel has a serious neck injury and may or may not remember what happened, making Esther anxious. Kate tells John what she discovered about Esther, but he is still in disbelief. While they argue, Esther sneaks into Daniel's room and tries to suffocate him with a pillow. Max sees what is happening and tries to alert her parents. The alarm in Daniel's room also goes off, with doctors coming in to revive him. Immediately after, Kate confronts Esther and slaps her, forcing the hospital staff to intervene aggressively. Waking up a few minutes later, she asks about Daniel, who has survived with some minor brain damage, and begs John not to allow Esther near Max, but he ignores her. That night, when Max removes her hearing aid and her dad tucks her in, Esther sneaks into the room and takes the aid, pretending to say goodnight to Max. A few hours later, John is getting drunk in the living room, struggling to make sense of his predicament. Esther comes downstairs, dressed up like an adult, and tries to seduce John, who is clueless to her efforts. Esther takes it a step further, attempting a kiss, but John, disturbed, pushes her away and explains that he couldn't love her in the same way he loves Kate. He then tells her to go to her room, but she demands not to talk to her like she's a child, prompting him to threaten, calling the orphanage about her the next day. Esther goes to her room crying. Meanwhile, Kate receives a call from a doctor at the Sarn Institute, who is familiar with Esther and warns her to evacuate her family from the house and alert the authorities. He then reveals that Esther isn't a little girl, but an adult woman with a hormonal disorder that stunts her growth. It turns out that despite her childlike appearance, Esther is a violent patient who has killed at least 7 people in the hospital, also noting that her body is full of scars, due to her resisting the occasional restraints. Back at the house, Esther trashes her room and removes all the makeup used to conceal the fact that she's an adult. John goes to check on her and discovers the psychotic paintings covering the walls. Kate calls him while approaching, but the power goes out before he can answer, prompting her to call the police instead. John, using a weak light source, searches the house until Esther suddenly stabs him. He is incapacitated but alive, so she keeps stabbing, stopping when she notices Max, who she goes after next. Kate crashes into the house and races upstairs to find John, but abandons him after realizing Max is in danger. She checks her room and the bathroom, finding Esther instead that shoots her. Kate hides in her bedroom and barely escapes Esther, who goes after Max again. Kate is watching both from a glass roof. Esther eventually corners Max and Kate breaks the roof, falling on top of Esther. Moments later, Max wakes Kate up, and they flee out into the forest. The police arrive and search the house, but Esther is nowhere to be found. It's not long, however, before she reappears, going after Kate and Max with a knife. Kate and Esther begin to wrestle, while Max picks up the gun and shoots, breaking the ice the two were standing on. Now drowning, they continue to fight, until Kate overpowers Esther and climbs back to safety. Esther crawls out as well and grabs Kate, begging her not to let her die. But Kate kicks her back into the lake,